Things are going to seem relatively quiet around the studio today, but tomorrow it's going to be a little bit busy within these walls. Just after the 9 o'clock hour tomorrow, there's going to be a film crew here from New York City. Why are they here? Well, they'll be coming into town. They're doing a documentary about the clash of cultures between a lot of our smaller Western communities and smaller cities and the refugee resettlement programs that are being, of course, promoted by the United Nations and the federal government here in the U.S. And yet the opposition continues to grow on the local levels. There's a meeting at City Hall today in Twin Falls, and the folks who are actually putting together that referendum on this CSI refugee program will be making a presentation. I think the filmmakers are going to be there this afternoon as well. This is a story that is not going away. It made the Wall Street Journal a week ago Saturday, so it's getting a lot of national attention. We've had some local people who were interviewed as well by some of the big newspapers around the country. So I just wanted to pass that along. That'll be taking place tomorrow. And I don't know what the film crews, if it may be that they're very objective, or this film crew may have an axe to grind, and it may not be my axe, if you get my drift. But I'm not really worried about that. I'd like a little give and take here in the studio. So the filmmaker, Alan, he's going to sit down with us tomorrow morning, and you'll have an opportunity to speak with him as well because they're also looking for public feedback from our radio audience. 8 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. I survived the weekend, as did, I believe, all of my coworkers. We spent a lot of time over at the Garden Home and Garden Show at CSI. Speaking of CSI, over the weekend, got to meet lots of very nice people. Got to sit in yesterday on the show by Jason Cameron from the Man Caves TV program, and we got talking about Tony Siragusa, who's his co-host, and I shared a couple of stories about the Goose, as he's known, that Jason did not know, and he said, "Oh, I can't wait to get back and we start filming again." I am going to give him the business about that. We had a wonderful time. They had a huge turnout. I showed up yesterday around 12:30 in the afternoon, and it was wall-to-wall people. Now, I worked there Friday afternoon. I worked there yesterday afternoon. I'm told on Saturday, though, that the crowds were just spectacular. And when you had temperatures in the 40s, not really warm enough to go outside and do a lot of your favorite things, perhaps, but the sun was blazing, travel was easy, so a lot of people came out and looked at many of the great exhibits. And I want to thank all of you for doing that. A couple of other things to talk about. If you were, perhaps living on Mars, you missed it. There was a primary in South Carolina for Republicans on Saturday. Donald Trump walked away again with a win. No one is surprised. Polls showed that he would be doing that. There was a caucus for Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders as Democrats in Nevada. We'll be talking about the Idaho Democrat caucus coming up in the next half hour with Randy Staples from Idaho Weekly Briefing, and he says there may be some surprises in store with Democrats coming up on, I think it's March 22nd, is the caucus here in Idaho for that party. Meanwhile, it's flip-flop now. The Democrats are going on to South Carolina. The Republicans headed for Nevada because tomorrow is Nevada's caucus for Republicans. And the Republicans are all looking perhaps to still put the brakes on Donald Trump. Now, he owns a massive casino complex in Las Vegas, which is the biggest metropolitan area. So he's one of the biggest employers in Nevada. That's obvious, which may mean that he now will rack up 3 straight. Although the two men who are closest to him, which is like saying, have you ever been to a race and the leader is everyone else is a lap down? Yeah. Right now, it looks like Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio are a lap down, and nowhere near as close as the Daytona 500 yesterday. But Trump has that big a lead, and it looks like this could continue, and he could run the table all the way to the convention. Now, it would be logical that they would be attacking Donald Trump, these two guys, but instead they continue to attack each other as if Trump isn't there. The Republicans just seem to have this belief that one day they're going to wake up and Trump's going to have vanished. And then they won't have to deal with him. I don't necessarily agree with that strategy. It doesn't seem to be working yet. And even though he's 70 years old, Trump seems to be in very good shape. And as long as he stays away from the CIA ranch down there in Texas, unlike Justice Scalia, he likely will live a long and productive life beyond this year's campaign. This is Marco Rubio speaking yesterday in Nevada. And of course, at one time when he was a little boy, he was a resident of that state. It may not do a whole lot to help him out, though, with voters there. But he was warning a crowd that there's going to be a great deal at stake if they do not select him.
You're going to have a caucus, and you're going to have a choice between names. So that's still a part of it. But I want to leave you today with a belief that this election is a lot more than just a choice between names. 2016 is a referendum. If we stay on the road we are on right now, we will become the first Americans who leave their children worse off than themselves. And that's exactly what will happen if in November of this year, we wake up to the news of a President Sanders or a President Clinton. And that's how I feel, too. That's how I feel.
People accuse Rubio of repeating the same speech over and over and over again, but how many times have you heard that speech from any number of politicians? You know, this is the most important election of our lifetime, and 2012 was the most important election of our lifetime, and 2008 was the most important election of our lifetime, and 2004, it just keep going back, and it happens every 4 years. This time around, though, there's simply a lot at stake, and I think that not maybe the most important in American history, that was likely 1860, or 1940, a close second to that. And 1912, perhaps third. This has probably a lot more resemblance to 1912, which in the long run gave us 8 years of Woodrow Wilson and the very seeds of big government that we have today, and the idea that people in power know more than all the rest of us how to lead our lives. Ted Cruz also touring Nevada, taking some time out at a rally that his folks put together, and he put his focus on Obamacare and religious liberty.
You pass a flat tax and you repeal Obamacare. And we will see small businesses growing, trying to impose millions of dollars of fines on the sisters under Obamacare in order to try to force the nuns to pay for abortion-inducing drugs and others. Now, let me give y'all a real simple rule of thumb. If you're litigating against nuns, you've probably done something wrong.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. However, we are at a point in time right now. Yes, however, but although 2 weeks ago, this guy looked like he was the giant slayer, that is Ted Cruz. He'd taken out Trump in the Iowa caucus. And ever since then, he's been slipping. And he even though he was almost a statistical dead heat with Rubio in South Carolina for second place, technically he was third. He comes away with no delegates. Rubio won one county, Charleston County, the only county he won in all of South Carolina. Trump cleaned up in every other county in that state. And Cruz couldn't even manage to pull one county, even with Phil Robertson there campaigning with him in a state known to be very evangelical. I looked at the breakdown yesterday. If you have not yet heard this, and it's probably been reported a number of places, just as in New Hampshire, Trump won in every Republican demographic, even evangelicals. And the other part of this is that 96% of the Republicans who showed up to vote yesterday or Saturday in South Carolina were white. And in fact, in Iowa and in New Hampshire, the numbers were overwhelmingly white. In fact, in excess of 90% of the turnout. The turnout was a record in South Carolina. About 750,000 people came out, 20% more than the primary there in 2012. So you ask what's going on here. Well, I've been hearing this argument. It's 8:15. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I've been hearing this from people all the time that poor old Whitey should learn to live with this, but we're going to be in the minority by 2040 in this country. Well, that's not true. We're not going to be the majority any longer. But what they failed to say is likely Whitey is going to be the plurality in this country for generations to come, if not hundreds and hundreds of years. And the Washington Post reported last week that a great many people who come to this country, Asians and Latinos, they end up marrying Caucasians, and then within a couple of generations, they don't even identify as Latino or Asian any longer. They become whiteys. So for all of this demographic talk that, this is the party of angry old white people, well, Trump also is picking up a lot of younger votes, but he's also picking up a lot of votes from white Democrats. And while Hillary Clinton can still rely on a lot of black votes, the actual population of black Americans in this country is down to, I think, under now 10% of the overall population. She's got no stranglehold on Latino candidates. She may have some Asian candidates, or voters, that is, Latino and Asian voters. But let's be honest about this, folks. The plurality that could still be put together, and if Trump starts pulling in votes from Democrats, and it looks like he is, white Democrats, he's going to win in November, even with all of the so-called high negatives, because if she's his main opponent, her negatives are higher than his. And the young people don't like her, and white voters feel abandoned completely by the Democrats. So it could well be that if the Republican Party becomes the party of white America, and that ends up representing, oh, I don't know, 40 to 45% of Americans over the next 100 years, and just about every white person joins the Republican Party, you're still going to be pulling in people from other ethnic backgrounds as well. It's not hard to imagine the Republican Party, if it can just get a few percentage points from Asians, Latinos, and blacks, that it could become the dominant political party. For all of the people who say that what's going on this year is the end of the Republican Party, it's the collapse of the Republican Party, no, I'm telling you, and I'm not endorsing Trump here whatsoever, now that he has come out in support of Planned Parenthood, but I'm saying this: he could be growing the numbers in the Republican Party by some ridiculously big amounts, and that could be something that stays with this party for decades, not just through maybe the next couple of election cycles, but for decades to come, if the elites know how to manage it. And unfortunately, obviously, we've seen the stumbling and the bumbling and the foolishness that's gone on there, and the broken promises and the fallen bushes, and it does not appear that they're learning anything from any of this. They would be happy if they had a party, just a tiny little party, dominated by their big donors and their country club friends and the other oligarchs, and if they never won another election. But they could all sit around at the country club and they could talk their theory, their conservative theory, none of which would apply to regular Americans who are struggling to get by. We're coming up on 20 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And just a quick note, too. A couple of publications today said that Ted Cruz, despite being an evangelical himself, that is a thinking that evangelicals are going to vote for the most Christian candidate may not be true as well anymore. Eric Erickson says that his communication staff needs to clear that up, and he needs to be a more broad-based candidate. And the Daily Caller saying the same thing, a writer by the name of Scott Greer. These are conservative publications. And Erickson is an evangelical Christian. And they're all realizing at this moment that that isn't going to be the main selling point in any election. America has drastically changed from the time that we were kids and we were growing up. We've got more on the way. In fact, a couple of other points about the Donald, if you will, who is, as we say, running away with this Republican race so far. I used to think this music was appropriate for my program. I just don't think I'm as flexible as at this late age as James Bond is any longer. 824, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Randy Staples, in about 15 minutes, will join us. Maybe 20 is a more accurate count, just in case you're grading me on that. He's from Idaho Weekly Briefing. He'll be talking with us about some issues going on. One of these, as I mentioned in the tease just before the show this morning, the Unborn Infants Dignity Act, proposed by a state senator in Boise. And this could be a really important law and protect us from some of the abuses that Planned Parenthood has done in other states. And we may also talk, too, about that deadline on cull onions. Yes, there's an effort to stop you from, government wouldn't want you to go to the store and end up with some cull onions that you'd get home and you'd be, rats, why did I end up with those in the bag? So we'll have details on that coming up a little later. I also want to tell you about Dream Room Design. This is a company that joined us a few weeks ago here on the air. This is a business that's been in operation really since the end of the last century, which is to say about 16 years now. Owner Bill Conant provides hands-on personal attention to each project, overseeing the job from start to finish. And he'll personally come to your home and help you design your dream project. The Better Business Bureau has also given him an A-plus rating. Many times as homeowners, you deal with large companies with offices all over the state. With Dream Room Design, you get one-on-one personal attention and a relationship throughout the project. The website is dreamroomdesign.com. There are reviews there, video testimonials, as well as written before and after pictures, product videos, and a ton of other details about the company and the services that are provided. Once again, dreamroomdesign.com. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 36. Yes, on our way to a beautiful day, about 40 for the high. Sooner or later, we got to break out of this, but obviously still in February, none of this is unexpected, right? People out there dream about warmer weather, and if you can't get away and enjoy it for a week in the middle of winter, I guess something's not right with your life. Speaking of people who can get away and do just about anything they like, Donald Trump. Well, when you're worth $9 billion, I mean, there's a great many things that you could do. He decided to detour on his way to Nevada as he left South Carolina. He stopped in Atlanta, Georgia, for a large rally in that city, and he took time out to talk a little bit about the success that he had in South Carolina.
It is crunch time. We have to go out and vote. We have to get out there. We have to vote. They sent us off with such a beautiful victory, such a conclusive victory.
Now, I mentioned tomorrow on this program, there's going to be a film crew in the studio with us, and they're going to be talking with us about the Islamic refugees who are coming to the United States, Muslim refugees, for resettlement here. Mr. Trump has said until we can figure out who all of these people are, we should stop that program altogether, not just in Twin Falls or Boise or various parts of Montana where people are now objecting to it, but stop that program nationwide.
Until we find out what's going on, we're going to be smart and we're going to be vigilant and we're going to hold things up, because there's no way we can allow people to come into this country. We don't know who they are, where they come from.
And I think that has been the feeling of a great many people out there who wouldn't necessarily support Donald Trump on other issues. But when it comes to the safety of your family, I guess you would say that, no pun intended, trumps everything else. And he's promising, more so than anyone else, politically incorrect it may be, that he will do whatever it takes to keep your family safe. It's 828. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. The telephone number, 736-0300. And you're up next. You're on air on KLIX.
Well, it's coming right to our local community tonight at 5 o'clock at the City Council chambers downtown. Twin Falls are going to have the Refugee Advocate Group making a presentation before the City Council to apply for matching grants from the Partnership for a New American Economy Research Fund. And all this is about, they're going to use our tax money to get money for whatever, housing or whatever it is for these refugees, and make it more palatable for them to come in here. But they're going to use our tax money, and absolutely Donald Trump is right on with the fact that these people, we're bringing them in, they're not vetted. We don't know who they are, and we're just playing Russian roulette bringing these people in from Syria or any of the Muslim countries.
Yeah.
And that's at 5 o'clock tonight. City Council, if you're concerned about this, we ought to load that City Council up there and let them know we don't want any of our tax money going to encouraging this kind of a activity.
Hey, thank you much for the update too as well. That is the thing, that these people who support these programs, Matt Walsh, who's a writer at The Blaze, and as I pointed out a couple of times, Matt is a former coworker of mine, used to do a talk radio show just after I finished mine at a station back on the East Coast. Matt had a piece the other day about these perverts going into women's locker rooms and restrooms in Seattle, saying, we knew it was going to happen, that they were going to be in there to try to look up women's skirts. And he said he saw a comment from a liberal who said, well, we're just going to have to learn to deal with that because, we wouldn't want to hurt the perverts' feelings. And it's the same way. They don't care that a guy in San Bernardino, California, gunned down a bunch of innocent human beings who happen to be mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, or children. They don't care because we wouldn't want to hurt, Abdul's feelings now, would we? And liberalism, as Michael Savage has said, is a mental disease. It's so clear. There was a liberal man of color on one of the morning shows yesterday, and I bring that part up because it's going to dovetail into what I'm talking about in just a moment, who said that the Republican Party is getting exactly what it deserves because it invited evil in the door, and he's referring to Donald Trump. By the way, after I leave here, I'm going to go help some of my liberal friends abort some babies. But you Republicans are evil. 8:34, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Up to 37, on our way to 40 today. Did you know that February, a few days left still in the month, is Heart Month? Here's a tip that you may not have thought of when it comes to your healthy heart. Dr. Christine Pickup of Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert reminds you to have your hearing checked, including a hearing check as part of your routine physical. Studies show that a healthy cardiovascular system, including heart, arteries, and veins, have a positive effect on your hearing. You can call Dr. Christine Pickup today at Mount Harrison Audiology. That's in Rupert, the number 312-0957, or you can log on to mountharrisonaudiology.com for more details. Coming up on 8:35, this is from the Daily Caller, and this just shows you the desperation we may be seeing from America's liberals. The Democrat National Committee, that is the organization headed by Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and the mayor of Baltimore, Stephanie Rawlings Blake, who was the one who said, yeah, go out and riot and burn down the city because we wouldn't want to hurt your feelings, and told the cops to stand back and let the looting and rioting go on. These are the people who are in charge of the Democrat Party, and they're angry that they're not running the country because they need to get control not only of the presidency again, but they want the House and Senate back so they can do more of these things, let people riot in the streets. But this is what the DNC was issuing over the weekend in South Carolina. It said 70% of the voters in his party think the Confederate flag should be flying over the state's capital. Because people where they were driving by and they were seeing the stars and bars, not technically the correct Confederate flag, it's an old Virginia battle flag, but they were driving down the road and they'd go, ah! They'd have these seizures, and they'd roll around and they'd fall out of their cars and then they'd drool on the side. It was terrible. People couldn't live because that flag was flying there. 38% wished the South had won the Civil War. Well, okay. Stop for a moment and think about that. Take away that issue of slavery, and if people in the South still will tell you that war was fought over a great many other issues. Slavery was on its way out already. But it was fought because Northern industrialists wanted to destroy Southern competition. And then they say, well, it's a good thing we had all of these amendments, the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendments came along after the war that cleared up all of those injustices of the South. Except, of course, Southern states weren't allowed to be involved in those amendments because they were not readmitted to the Union at the time. So the North said, all right, we're going to have a small pool of states and we're just going to, run these things through. And then when we're done, the South can come back in. Wouldn't that be fair? 80% support banning, and, states' rights died with that too. So the notion now we're 50 provinces instead of 50 states. The writer says 80% supporting banning Muslims from entering the United States. The DNC thinks that's wrong, that 4 out of 5 people who voted for Donald Trump believe that we should at least consider the safety of the people who already live here first. Now, that's somehow hateful. If you put a lock on your door, is that hateful? I showed up at the apartment complex the other day, and I was unloading some groceries, and there was a sign saying, lock your doors and your car doors, because there was somebody who apparently had too much to drink, walked into the wrong house, and crawled into bed with the wrong person the other night in the very same development. Now, should we allow people to do that? No, you want to keep people safe, so you put locks on doors. And you arrest people who do those things, and you take them away, and they have to sit in jail for a while. It's called timeout among liberals. But this is the same thing. 80% of the American people, I don't even think it's among Democrats or Republicans, I think a lot of Democrats feel the same way, would say, in this situation, we need to put the lock on the door. And yes, there may be some very nice people out there who won't be allowed in to compete for our jobs, which we don't have anyway right now. But for the time being, that will keep my family safe, and drunken perverts won't be crawling into bed with my daughter. To make the analogy to what happened here in Twin Falls the other day. 62% support a national database of Muslims in the United States. And again, the DNC says, well, that's wrong. The FBI says it wants to look inside people's cell phones. I'm not hearing the liberals screaming about that or claiming that Donald Trump's behind it. And it concludes, if Donald Trump wins on Saturday, the message will be clear. These are the values of the GOP. Well, he did win on that pledge that he will keep America safe. Gosh, what an incredible concept. If there's anything that the federal government is really charged with doing, that is the prime directive, keeping Americans safe. All of this other stuff, this health care and Social Security and Medicare Advantage, everything else, that's all just gravy that's been lathered on over the last couple of 100 years. But that federal government is to ensure that people don't come here and kill you. 20 minutes away from 9 o'clock. Randy Staple is joining us in just a few moments from Idaho Weekly Briefing. We do this every Monday morning with Randy. We've got a lot to talk about, including the Democrats and their caucus coming up next month right here in Idaho. May not go the way the party establishment would like, but then again, it can always flip a few coins or pull a few aces out of some pockets and save it for their gal, I suppose. That's on the way. It's 36 at our studios.